I know, and sunny.
Hello,
Uh-huh.
Hello,
hello.
Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Hi.
Paula,
Hi,
you're
hi,
next to a
Rabbi.
giant bird. Be very careful. There's a giant bird next to you.
I can't get rid of it.
Don't.
It looks good though. It's a very cute, very beautiful bird.
Thank you very
How are we
much.
doing? How are we doing, Juliana? How are we doing? Jerry, always
Good.
right in this world, in the world. Jerry's
Ah,
back.
I wouldn't go that far.
How are we all doing? How are we all doing?
It's
Hi, Sudi.
it, it's as good
Uh,
Hi, Rabbi.
as it can be.
Hi, Sudha.
and
Hello,
hi.
Paula.
All right. So this actually is. I am coming to you live from New York. And no, it is not Saturday night. Uh, See, ask me how I know that reference. Well, don't ask me. But
Right. How do
the
you know that reference?
but either way, we are here for a couple reasons. Number one, uh, yesterday and today are very significant days. I would say on the Chabad calendar, but the truth is on the Jewish calendar. In fact, on the world calendar, because yesterday was the yahrzeit, the day of the passing of the previous Rebbe. Anybody who does not know his personal history, you are depriving yourself of incredible inspiration. This was a man who faced down communist Russia. He was public enemy number one, as defined by the Communist Party. In fact, as I said, my grand great grandfather was sent off to Siberia and he never came home. And the crime that was such a massive crime that he had committed that warranted such a punishment was that he was Agent Schneerson, just being what the authorities deemed was an agent of the infamous Rabbi Yosef Schneerson was enough to cost him, in a sense, the rest of his life with his family. And but he won. Ultimately, the previous Rebbe won. Give me one moment. The previous Rebbe was eventually arrested, even though the communist regime knew that by doing so they would create an international furor because of and which is exactly what happened. Ultimately, there was a huge pressure campaign from governments all over the world to have the previous Rebbe released. But they said, with this, at least we'll bring down this entire network of hundreds of clandestine yeshivas and mikvahs and shuls, etc., that were operating underground. And the previous Rebbe was at the nexus, was at the center of this entire web throughout all 11 time zones. And so they searched through the entire property of the previous Rebbe, and they found not a single shred of paper of evidence. There was no paper trail whatsoever because the previous Rebbe had it entirely in his mind, which is remarkable. Eventually, he was brought into the infamous Berlino prison, in which they executed about 300 inmates a night at the height of the
Oh
Stalinist
boy.
purges. And the previous Rebbe was beaten. Eventually, the end of his life, his body was broken and he couldn't walk because of the beatings that he received over there. And also emotionally, the agent that had taken the lead in creating the case against the previous Rebbe and eventually having him arrested, very proudly told him that he only was around this agent named Nachmanson because his parents were devout Hasidim of the previous Rebbe's father, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. They had come to him for a blessing when they were childless. He gave them a blessing, and they had miraculously gave birth to a son who was this Nachmanson. And he says, "I'm going to be the one who destroys you." That's how, in a sense, unfortunately, how deep the poison of the Party was, that he was so proud that even though he was born with a blessing from the previous Rebbe's father, that he was going to be the one to take down the previous Rebbe. Ultimately, the previous Rebbe withstood all their interrogations. It's remarkable. He wrote this all in a volume that he called Tractate Hell, part of his diary, Besechet Gehenom, Tractate Hell. chapters 1, 2, and 3. If you can read it, it's also been translated in English. It is a fascinating read. Because the previous Rebbe gets very personal with what the feelings and the sentiments he was dealing with. But ultimately, he then was freed and exiled from Russia, only to be in Warsaw, Poland, at just in time for the Blitzkrieg. And he was holding services on Yom Kippur, and a building was bombed and came down on their heads. And what they did is they picked themselves up, moved to the next building, and continued the services. This is eventually was actually through a fascinating collaboration between the U.S. State Department and the head of German military intelligence, Admiral Canaris, who was the head of the Abwehr, to sneak the previous Rebbe through Berlin under the noses of the SS. Eventually, by the way, Admiral Canaris was executed by Hitler because of subversive activities in which he did not conform to Hitler's vision, etc., etc. But the previous Rebbe eventually came to the United States for the final 10 years of his life, broken physically, but not broken in spirit. And when they told him, and as we talked about last week, that this is too big of the America is very benign and lovely, et cetera, but you're not going to be able to make anything of the United States. America is anders. It's not like the shtetl, the old country with yeshivas and shuls and all that. This is America. Everybody works on Shabbat. Nobody has beards, etc. And the previous Rebbe, in the last 10 years of his life, looked at America square in the eye and said, by the time I'm done with you, America is going to be different than it is now, and because it is ultimately no different than where we came from, and we're going to have yeshivas and shuls and etc., etc. Nobody had that vision. Nobody at that time had the vision. In fact, the Jews of the old country used to call America the Golden Medina, but also the Midbar Shmama, the barren wasteland, the spiritual wasteland. And only the previous Rebbe came with that conviction. And actually, in the last years of his life, did not only work on America, but worked on the entire world. He was actually the first one to send these shluchim, emissaries to all corners. He was the one who sent the first shluchim to Morocco and other such places, and the Rebbe picked it up from there and obviously exploded it into what it is today.
I thought it was the Rebbe. I always thought it was the Rebbe who sent them to Morocco. No, it was his father-in-law.
His father-in-law was the first one to send a few shluchim. He did it. The previous Rebbe did not really set it up as an entire system and network. It was just that he knew that the communities in Morocco were very large Jewish communities, but without rabbis, and so sent emissaries. And the Rebbe picked that up and turned it into a worldwide network.
Amazing.
But the previous Rebbe truly was. If you have to read his life story, it is remarkable. And obviously, on top of everything else, it wasn't just about his heroism. He was a gaon. He was a Torah scholar like the world hadn't seen, and righteous. You can read in his writings just a level of righteousness. He was what we call the Nasi Hador. He was the shepherd and the leader of the generation. And on the 10th of Shvat, which was yesterday, on Shabbat in the year 1950, the previous Rebbe passed. 10 years after having arrived in the United States. Immediately, the Hasidim felt devastated and bereft without their leader. And at that time, the previous Rebbe had two sons-in-law. One was the elder and the more well-known, because he was just more of a prominent face, and he was known as the Rashag, Rav Shmayo Garari. And from a very prestigious family, a saintly individual and very smart. And then the younger son-in-law, the Ramash, Rav Menachem Schneerson. But those that were in the know knew that the one who was the Rebbe, who had the Rebbe material, was actually the younger son-in-law. Interestingly enough, even the Rashag knew that while many came to him and asked him to take, they just assumed by default he is the elder son-in-law, the more prominent face, that he would be the one to assume. Ultimately, he himself became the Rebbe's most devout disciple, which is a remarkable.
This is exactly a Moshe Aaron story.
Exactly right. He was the Aaron to the Rebbe's Moshe, as it were. Really a remarkable of the relationship that the two of them had. And the Rebbe showed him tremendous respect. In fact, while the Rebbe was in the middle of his double heart attack, that famous or infamous Shmini Atzeret, and they cleared the room, etc., when the Rebbe's life was literally hanging by a thread in 1978, the Rebbe refused to receive medical attention until he finished the Hakafot. And the last Hakafa, he would always dance with his brother-in-law. The seventh Hakafa was him and his brother-in-law. And so when the Hasidim saw the few Hasidim that stayed in there, realized that the Rebbe was insisting on this, they turned to the Rashag and they said, "When you go up there, one turn, and then done." Right? Let's get this over with so we can get the Rebbe into get medical attention. So sure enough, the Rashak really kind of jogged his way up as quickly as possible, did one turn with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe's face was white. The Rebbe was right in the middle of a heart attack. And the Rebbe danced with him, and he starts pulling away after one circle. And the Rebbe looks at him and says, "What's that best?" Well, all of a sudden, just one time around, and with a semi-smile on his face, and the Rashag said, "Ich bin vermattet. I'm tired. I'm tired." And the Rebbe smiled. The Rebbe understood whatever it was, but they really truly had. Ultimately, as we know, there was a story with the whole story with the books in the contested library of the Rebbe, and I shared the story. But when the Rashag's own son was the one fighting the Rebbe for inheriting the library, for ownership of the library, he asked his father to testify on his behalf. And his father, the Rashag, said, "If you bring me to court, do not bring me to court, because if you bring me to court, I'm going to testify on behalf of my brother-in-law."
Wow.
Against his own son, it says, because that's how devout of a chassid he was to the Rebbe. A remarkable relationship. But while officially the Rebbe only took leadership in the year 1951, in the famous Farbrengen that was on the yard site, so on this day, just a year later, on the 10th of Shvat, 1 year later, the Rebbe was holding the Farbrengen in 770. There is photos of this Farbrengen, and there's also an audio recording. The official acceptance of leadership by a Rebbe would be, or how do you know that? Because the Rebbe was at that point as one of the two sons-in-law of the deceased Rebbe of the previous Rebbe, he was providing leadership and counsel and guidance, etc., etc., but he had not formally accepted the role of being Rebbe. And the Hasidim knew this, even though he was on Shabbos, he was giving over Torah thoughts and talking to people and answering questions, etc. But it was not an official capacity as a Rebbe, more as just a kind of a community leader. What would be the indication that the Rebbe would be a Rebbe? When he would say a maimer. Only a Rebbe could say a maimer, a Hasidic discourse.
And that was the Basi Lagani, right?
That's where he's going with it.
Yep. So what ended up happening on this day, that this Farbrengen, after nightfall, so was really the 11th of Shvat today. Today is the 11th of Shvat. While the Hasidim were there, the Rebbe, one of the Hasidim begged the Rebbe, says that all the talk is beautiful and meaningful and inspirational, but the Olam vil Chassidus, but the community here wants to hear the Rebbe say Chassidus, bitte Rebbe, zog Chassidus, please say Chassidus. And the Rebbe shoot him down with his hand. But then a few nigunim later, all of a sudden the Rebbe opens up, citing from the same discourse that the previous Rebbe completed his tenure with. In a sense, really carrying the baton forward. They quote from the Song of Songs that at the moment of Mount Sinai, God says, "I have come to my garden. I've come back home." That this world is truly God's home, and the Midrash on Shir Hashirim expounds on why that is, and then the previous Rebbe's Maimer and then the Rebbe's Maimer take this and really run with it. Why this world in particular, more than any other world, is truly God's primary abode. The center of the universe, of the metaphysical universe, is not heaven and not all the realms that are up there. It is this world. And why it would be this world. And for those that want to learn that, you should have come to all the Shabbos morning Hasidus classes that we had the past couple of weeks.
Oh, don't make me feel so bad.
9:15 to 10. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the parsha of the week and also what makes this week special. This is a very, very special week on the Jewish calendar because it is Shabbat Shira.
That would do it too.
Yes. And Paula touched on another thing, right? It's Shabbat Shira, the Shabbat.
This was my
song.
daughter's bat mitzvah.
Is that a portion?
Yep.
Beautiful one. Does she have a good singing voice?
Yeah.
Well, then she got the right parsha because Shabbat Shira, the Shabbos of song, and Paula mentioned that this year we have it coupled with Tu B'Shvat. Doesn't fall out exactly in the lead. The Tu B'Shvat leads right into it, as it were. But it's a very, very exciting Shabbos. Why? Why Shabbos Shira? Why is it called the Shabbat of song? Because that's what features the Torah portion. Is the famous Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea. The song that the Jewish people sang upon witnessing the miracle and the salvation that was the splitting of the Red Sea. Right? By the way, what happened when the blue hat fell into the Red Sea? It got wet. I'm a dad.
Okay.
10 times over, I'm allowed to say dad jokes.
Stupid
Anyway.
dad jokes.
Yes. It was the oldest one I heard. I can't remember from which one of my teachers, which grade I heard that joke, and I've never forgotten it. We found it incredibly funny, I have to say. As a class, we were probably second or third grade, but we found it very, very funny. Anyways, so we understand that at the end of last week's Torah portion, the Jewish people have officially left Egypt, right? They have officially left Egypt. They have Pharaoh cried uncle, finally, right? Enough's enough. He said, I'll let them go. After the 10 plagues, and the 10th plague striking closest to home as he himself was the firstborn, he comes chasing Moshe down and says, fine, go, right? And it was that that day, the 15th of Nisan, the Jewish people left Egypt and were on their way to freedom. Were they? Right? But this teaches us in the continued conversation about how the Torah is not talking about a previous generation. They are not talking about the Jewish people of old, right? Anybody who sits at the Seder and tells a story of 3,000 years ago has missed the entire point of the Seder. And the Seder says this again and again. This is the most common theme of, in a sense, the messaging of the Seder is that this is not about what occurred 3,000 years ago, but it is our story. Our story. And so this narrative of the fact that when you are freed from the immediate circumstance that had you imprisoned, understand that most likely your first step out, or that first moment of freedom, is going to be short-lived if you are not prepared for the fact that the forces that pulled you into that situation have not given up. You have busted out, but you are not yet truly free. And of course, the message comes with Pharaoh regretting and immediately chasing after Klal Yisrael. Yes, Paula.
Question. Why did the Egyptians need to drown in the sea? The Israelites were over out of the water on the other side. Why didn't the water just close up, leave the Egyptians there? Meanwhile, until the Egyptians would finally be able to get across, we'd be long, 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 long gone. I have an idea for an answer, but I'd much rather hear yours because I know it'll be better.
First of all, no guarantees. Second of all, there's more than one answer given, but before I give them, go ahead, Paula.
Tel Kana.
Okay, clarify. I think I know where you're going with this, but explain.
One of the attributes of Hashem as Ish Milchama, an entity of war, has to do with vengeance. As
Okay.
an act of vengeance, I could see this, but the question then becomes, why did Hashem have to show his vengeance at that moment? To the extent that we are taking out that pinky of wine at the Seder because of the suffering and the killing of the Egypt, it just gets all mumbled up. So give me a better answer.
Why can't
So I
why
wanna
can't
tell
it
you
be
something.
why can't it be punishment instead of vengeance?
So it's interesting that the word kana, when we translate it as revenge purely, we associate it with the kind of revenge we take. Revenge we take is entirely emotional, which makes it wrong to a certain degree. Not necessarily wrong in the sense that as we'll talk about in a moment, but emotion always is fraught with the fact that I may go overboard, right? My mind is the one that is calculating, and my heart, if I let my heart have free reign, most oftentimes I will go to an extreme. I will go beyond that which is warranted. And so when we use the term kana, and we mean as revenge, we mean as we take revenge, which is a very emotional thing. And oftentimes our goal is not to be proportionate. Our goal is to be, to really let them have it, right? Now, the word kana probably would be better translated as retribution, which is a little bit closer to, I think, what Jerry is saying. And then we're going to bring the proofs in the Az Yashir itself, in the song of the Az Yashir itself, that this is more retribution. So the first answer is that you are correct, Paula, that but to an extent, that God is using this as an opportunity not just to free the Jews of a threat, but to bring the proper retribution onto the Egyptians. And interestingly enough, he was originally, as we say, that always that God's midat harachamim comes before his midat hadin.
Right. Absolutely.
And God gave them the opportunity. When did he give them off the opportunity?
With all the plagues.
With the plagues, and each one of the plagues, right? He ramped it up, and then even after, right? They could have very much let it lie, and at that point, the Egyptians would have suffered, but not nearly in equivalent to imprisoning and persecuting and murdering the Jewish people in the way they had, right? They were all complicit in murder of every little baby boy, right? And all the persecution and the rape, right? We know they all also raped willy-nilly, right? Because that's the whole story of why one of the Egyptians was beating this fellow that Moshe and eventually Moshe killed this Egyptian. What was he doing that had him picking on this particular fellow? Because he had just raped the spouse of this Jew, right? And now he was beating this Jew because he wanted to get him out of the way, because he decided he liked this woman and wanted her for himself. So they were guilty of every kind of capital crime, and honestly deserved death, all of them. But God gave them an opportunity. He says, if you let the people go, and whatever it is, you got the 10 plagues, etc. And to a certain degree, Paula, like you were saying, right? Just let's put a desert between you guys. between the Jews and the Egyptians. But no, when the Egyptians wouldn't leave well enough alone, they were unrepentant, right? At that point, they did not deserve God's largesse. They did not no longer deserved his mercy above and beyond his judgment, and so he meted out judgment and proper called for retribution. Now, how do we know that even as he meted out this retribution, and when this was the wholesale chaotic drowning of all the Egyptians? Because we find, and part of what I'd like to do here in Az Yashir, I'm trying to find just the cleanest version of the text that I could put up on the screen so that we can go through, because there's fascinating nuance in this Song of the Sea, which as a rule always is the case. Whenever you have a song, by definition, a song means that there is depth to the prose, right? That is not the typical when you speak. When you speak, you basically say what you say.
Not narrative,
right?
it's poetry.
Correct. And in poetry, there's depth to what is it? Okay, I found it. Okay, here we go. Az Yashir. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Where's the Zoom? Is sharing the screen. Where's my screen share? Oh, there it is. Everybody sees the screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Still no?
Not yet. There
Here
it
we
is.
go.
Okay, and now I'm going to do a little something here. I'm going to put myself in the screen. Everybody sees me off to the side over there?
Look
Cool.
like a cartoon character next to the. Okay.
Am I pointing in the right direction?
No, mirror it.
Right.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Az Yashir. Okay, there it is. Now, what I'd like to do, as I said, is highlight some nuance in the Az Yashir. Okay? We're going to start straight. We're not going to have time to do nearly anything. We're not going to give this a proper treatment. Az Yashir has some of the longest, most involved Rashis of the entire Torah. And he's not even getting into the depth of it. Again, Rashi, as a general rule, is just saying a simple explanation. So what Rashi primarily does is there's so many new words or new versions of the words, some very fascinating phonetics, that if you're a linguist, there's tivla emo, zita emo,
Exactly.
combinations of words, ichasiumu, that Rashi spends a lot of time, because on top of everything else, he's a linguist, and Rashi wants you to properly understand why this word and not that word, and is this word, what is the connotation, what is the prose of this word? Is this a past perfect participle? I don't know what these things are in English. I could do better in Hebrew, but basically, for those that know, this is Rashi. Rashi is the grammarian of Hebrew. And he actually draws a lot on Onkelos for his understanding of it. He will say Targum. The Targum translates as follows: I agree or I disagree based on what have you. Let's begin with, for example, Az Yashir Moshe, right? Right?
Yes.
Now it's
What's
interesting.
the odds? What's the odds?
But Az implies Az Yashir doesn't mean and then Moshe
Will. Future.
and the Israelites sang,
Right.
because then it would say Az Sharu Moshe Uvenei Israel.
Exactly.
Az Yashir is the future, saying that this song will have a bookend. There will be a bookend of the song. One, Shira Chadasha, Shibuchu Giyulim, right? This new song will be sang in the coming of Mashiach.
Right.
So that this is the first of the redemptions and will be bookended with the last of the redemptions. And as we sang the song, we will sing the song. We will then sing the song, Moshe and all the Jewish people. All right? So there is so much here. Let's move to, let's see if we can find something in each verse, okay? To pick to pick apart a little bit, okay? Next verse, right? Aziv Zimratka, Vayhili Lishua, God mighty and retribution were God's might and retribution were my salvation. Vayhili Lishua, right? Where do we have that quote from Vayhili Lishua? When do we say that also? King David borrowed those words for his famously that he included Tehillim, and we include that in the Havdalah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
We include that in the Havdalah. Vayhili lishua, shaftamayim b'sason mimayneha Yeshua, right?
Right.
Vayhili lishua, and it was for me a salvation. But here's an interesting thing: Zekeli v'anvehu. This is my God, right? And I will glorify him. Right? Now, as you see, by the way, the translation adds some deeper, some other twists or understandings of these. But I don't want to go into that because we can spend too much time on all these things. But I will.
You got to hear this.
Yes. Go ahead.
You know, when you're doing the reading of the Torah in shul, you break at different points into a different melody that is not the regular trop. And I'm looking at this like for the first time, and I'm going through this, and it seems to me like every time you break in, the reader breaks into that additional trop. It's giving the attribute, giving praise to Hashem. The rest is telling the story, and then boom.
Of course, very good. Yes.
Wow.
Yep, exactly correct. The transcendental, the crescendo notes of it are when we are paraphrasing the singing of the praises to Hashem. Zekeli ve'anvehu Elokei aviv arom emenhu, or mi chamocha ba'elim Hashem, mi chamocha, etc. That's when when we're telling the story, and then that causes us to break into a praise of God. That we sing. We sing it with a unique trop. And God willing, I could have said that you will hear it on Shabbos. I could have said that was a certainty. Although somebody did ask in the show, Michael Kivel, who's a beautiful Balkore, asked Tulane. The only thing is, I don't know if we're on the same page as to which parts to highlight. So we're all hoping that he's going to hit all these crescendo notes, but ultimately, Zekeli ve'anvehu is a very fascinating thing. This prompts the Talmud to say the following words: Ma shera'a shivcha al hayam lo ra'a Yecheskel ben Buzi kol yamav. The revelation that a maidservant and a child saw on the sea, even the second greatest prophet of all time, Ezekiel himself, who saw the Merkavah, he never saw this. Give me a moment. Hello, I'm just giving a class. Why? Because every prophet except for one, except for Moshe, every other prophet began their prophecies with the following words: Ko Amar Hashem. Like so, said Hashem. Ko, right, with the word ki, which means like, as if. Similar to this. Why? Because they were not able to speak with a certainty, to be able to point their finger and say this exactly. How would you say that? You wouldn't say ko. You would say zeh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But even every single person was able to sing the Az Yashir and to say zeh keli ve'anvehu. This mara be'atzba'o ve'amar zeh. They were able to point with their finger and say, this is my God. They saw God so manifest in the way that only Moshe saw. At that moment, the revelation of God was so manifest, they were literally able to point and say, Zeh Keli, this right here, what I'm pointing at, that is God.
Notice that it's also in the singular. Kaylee.
Yes, Kaylee. No, that's the point.
But who's saying that? This is exactly what you're saying.
Every person was able, that's the point. Every person was able to say, this is my God. Who wrote that book? I think Herman Wouk wrote a book called This Is My God. His book on philosophy, he quoted, and it's a beautiful title because it is a quote from this. This is my God. And basically in this book he's writing, this is my God. This my personal relationship with God, and I share it with all of you. How Judaism has informed my relationship with God, and he put he's a great author, and this so he borrowed this term to write his book. Yes, Andy.
So I'm going to divert a bit because as I listen to this and going back over so many years of different darash on this. General concept that those folks who were there to witness to say that, and we are meant to say that today, we are a greater generation who says that today than they were of that time, even though they were closer to the flame, closer to the actual truth, to literally, as you just articulated, to be there and to be able to witness and say something. What it requires of us is greater, and therefore for us to say it today is a greater act. Over.
Beautifully said. Agreed 100%, which is why it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu, it says that the Talmud says something interesting. It says that the Ha'ish Moshe, the Moshe the man, Anav Ma'od, was the humblest of all individuals. The Talmud talks about this, and one of the commentaries say, what made Moshe so humble? Ma Ra'a Moshe. What did Moshe see that made him be so humble? He said that he saw this generation, the generation that was on the threshold of Mashiach. So Moshe Rabbeinu looked into the future, right? Saw Jerry and said, oh my God, I'm humbled before her. Right? So yeah. Jerry is worthy that Moses should be humbled, but the rest of us, then he looked at me and you and all of us and says, man, I'm so humbled compared to them. Why? The obvious question is why. We strive to do our best, but I can't say that I've done anything in my life that would warrant that Moses should be humbled before me. And the answer is actually yes. Sandy, as you put it, Moses says, my righteousness, of course, I'm seeing God face to face. How can I be anything but righteous? Witness Mount Sinai, witness the splitting of the sea, being able to point to God. The fact that here they are 3,500 years into, or 2,500 years into an exile. 2,500 years from the last time an offering was brought on the altar in the temple. And they still celebrate all the holidays, and they still mourn the temple's destruction, and they still give up their lives for the sake of Judaism, and they still teach their children to be proud Jews, despite the fact that it's going to come with risks, etc., etc. That humbled Moshe. So yes, your point is well taken. But turning now to getting a little bit to Paula, to answering your direct question about God drowning all the Egyptians, and seeming to be slightly excessive, I guess, is the kind of the emotional underpinning of the question. Why was it necessary for God to do this? Ultimately, this was the opposite of excess, and here is an interesting nuance that makes this point. Look at verse 6. Yimincha Hashem nedari bakoach, Yimincha Hashem tiratz oyev. God, your right hand, we're saying, is the one adorned with power, and it was you with the right hand that you shattered your enemies. Now, here's something interesting. Anybody know Kabbalistically, which hand is the hand of judgment? Which hand is the hand of retribution? And which hand is the hand of mercy and giving? The right hand is the hand of mercy. It's the left hand that is the hand of judgment and retribution. So which hand would it have been proper? And in the Az Yashar, we double down on this. We say it twice. Yimincha Hashem, Yimincha Hashem. And Rashi actually says it, Yemincha, Yemincha. That's how Rashi, the title of that piece, segment of commentary is the double Yemincha,
Right.
and makes this point that we had the nuance to see that God, even in bringing the retribution on the enemies, did so with the hand of mercy, showed restraint, even as he brought retribution to his foes. Where do we see restraint? And Rashi points out this point. Especially, by the way, it's not Rashi so much as he's citing the Talmud on this. Look at verse 5. Verse 5 uses a metaphor as to how they met their end, right? The deep waters covered them. They sank into the depths. What does the word say?
Evan. Kamo Evan.
Kamo Evan, like a stone, okay? Right? Now, move forward a little bit. Verse 10. Verse 10. But you blew with your wind, the sea enveloped them, they sank into the mighty water like lead. Ka'oferet, not ka'aven, not like stone, like lead. Right? Oferet is lead. Okay? Stone, then they said like lead, and then go back actually to verse 7. In your great majesty, you destroy those who rose up against you, send forth your fury, it consumed them, kakash, like straw. So what was it? It was like a stone? Was it like lead or was it like straw?
Yes.
Very good. You have all been well trained. Yes.
We are your students.
Yes. The Talmud says that God was very exact in meting out his punishment. Those that they were all deserving of the death penalty, but those that were the least worse among them were treated like lead. They sunk straight to the bottom and died quickly. Their end came quick. Those that were a little worse in the way they treated the Jewish people sunk like a stone. A little bit of bouncing around, but eventually met their end expeditiously. Those that were the worst were like straw, drowned like straw, which you can imagine meant it was a prolonged process.
That does sound vengeful.
But not necessarily vengeful. The point is that God meted out measure for measure. In this, we are seeing that God is not just. Ultimately, we have to understand that it is part of justice. You know, who said it? I'm not sure. They say it is that to be benevolent to the wicked is to be cruel to the innocent.
Yes.
That there is a certain amount. Imagine you are the one who had your child torn out of your arms and thrown into the Nile River. And this particular Mitzri, this particular Egyptian, did it again and again with joy. It was something that a sadistic individual who did this and then raped daughters, etc., etc. It is not fair that this person should be, quote unquote, let off. It's not justice. It's not balance.
Do you know about the psychiatrist or psychologist, Gad Saad? Yes. He's a Lebanese. He says that you shouldn't apply suicidal empathy.
That is, he's talking about what's going on, especially right now in Europe. And that's starting to.
But he said, if you have too much empathy for people, then it's suicidal. Like for bad people, then it's suicidtal. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And ultimately, and this is a point, because Paula also to a point, it's not like this was happening in a vacuum. This event was having international
Mm.
repercussions. This event became known to the world, and it's ultimately why all these other nations were trembling when the Jewish people, because key to this, you can say, like, fine, it's important that there be retribution. If there's people can learn from it, right? Otherwise, the answer is yes, people did learn from this. This was this had in a sense, it achieved also that goal of making it clear to the world that if you act in this behavior in this kind of way, there will be retribution. So ultimately, it achieves multiple things. It was fair, it was just, it was preventative, um, uh, and also don't forget there is more than one world, right? It actually is a sign of God's justice and almost benevolence if He metes out a punishment in this world rather than the world to come.
So
For
that,
Sandy, and then
I'm sorry.
Juliana.
So,
Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, it gets me, always comes back to my thoughts that when you reference that the rest of the world was trembling, there's been many times just going through all of Bereshit and the such where the world knows. The world knows of Hashem. I mean, whether or not we get to Balak and Balaam and all that, knows and knows and knows and it doesn't make a decision. So when Hashem uses the Jewish people and does this marriage with us, the Hebrews, and we come about to be, I'm just kind of curious why more of the world didn't take the lead and follow. Why Hashem did not create this to happen more, with the obvious that they witness or that they recently heard of and have more of a positive influence immediately. Over.
I think the answer to that question is an important point in general. They say an Air Force can never win a war. You cannot win a war with an Air Force, with an aerial campaign and kind of dropping bombs from above, because you're not effectively working on the ground. You're going to always need the ground troops. You're going to need to have soldiers, boots on the ground. God, with as many miracles and whatever it is, ultimately people are very good at poo-pooing pretty much anything. From above, kind of with all the fireworks, without boots on the ground, working in the trenches, you're not, and we are God's boots on the ground. That's what God asks of us. We are the ones that have to entrench the morality, the clarity, the connection to God. God will make the fireworks that we can then point at, but ultimately it's going to be us, the boots on the ground, that get the mission accomplished. It obviously is also very dangerous to be the boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. We commit to that. We commit to being willing to do that. So yeah, it's that partnership. God does His part, but then we have to follow up. Juliana.
I think this fits perfectly with the previous point, namely the fact that God also demonstrated tremendous psychological insight that most people lack. What God knows perfectly well is that what some of us kind-hearted do-gooders think is kindness is perceived as weakness. God knew that. When people don't get that, and they do not behave in a manner similar to the way God did, namely proportional retribution, they need the boots on the ground, other people to explain to them, hey guys, wake up. You are kidding yourself. IDF, do a lessons learned. American so-called liberals, do a lessons learned because you don't get it. Retribution is doing the right thing and the kind thing.
There's a lot of truth to that, which ultimately is Hashem always opens with rachamim. But the word we use for his retribution primarily is din. Now, one of the tools of din, which is justice, is, as Paula said, kana, retribution. It's a tool. It's not the goal. It's a question is what's serving what? Is the end game retribution or is the end game justice? If the end game is retribution, then it's revenge. If the end goal is justice, balance, fairness, that others should learn, right? And again, in the Az Yashir itself, it makes the point that the nations of the words heard and were the nations of the world heard and trembled.
And trembled, right?
Because that's key to this, right? God says, I'm going to do this, because by the way, he could have caused all the Egyptians to suffer painful, quietly and right in the middle of the night, right? He did this in a very bombastic way, right? That all would take heed. And to this day, the reverberations of the fact that there is a God who metes out justice when most people will think they will cite back to biblical references. It still reverberates. These events still reverberate as a for many people a prophylactic, right? The God who brought Egypt low is still out there, as it were, right? Keeping an eye and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's important. But now let's turn it a little bit, Paula, and with this we'll conclude our story. Okay.
Thank you.
We have to understand, too often, we push back, right, our own inner enemy, as it were, far enough that they're over the horizon. And what happens? We become complacent, right? Why? Because inherently, I wouldn't say we're lazy, but nobody's looking to schwitz if they don't have to. So if I can push far enough back that this is not an immediate concern, right? Job done. But it's not really. Most of the time, it's not a job done. And to understand to a certain degree that we thought we put a desert between us and the Egyptians, and that would be enough, right? Paula, did that prove to be enough? No.
Good Lord, no.
So say putting a sea between us and the Egyptians would have been enough? Wouldn't have either been enough. This is an important thing to know about our own evil, right? They're the kernel of pure evil, the Amalek, right? Certain things need to be taken care of all the way.
Yeah.
All the way.
But they never will be.
That is why when we say the Az Yashir, right, Paula, and we fall into a despair, right, every single day, what do we finish off? This is why we finish off with these words. Ve'alu Moshi'im Behar Tzion Lishpot et Harisav has nothing to do with Az Yashir.
Right.
But what's it connect the Az Yashir to? When in fact we will get it done. Right? V'haital Hashem hamlucha v'haya Hashem l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. Paula, the point is almost like the Az Yashir is telling us that we can never truly rest on our laurels until our Egypt is utterly sunk beneath the seas, and that's not going to happen till Mashiach comes, i.e., stay vigilant. Always. Don't think because you put a desert in between yourself, or even you think you put a sea between yourself and understand, right? Like so many Americans, right, thought that, we put anti-Semitism behind us, right? We left that in on the other side of the Holocaust, right? And now the world then still needed to get rid of a few peccadillos and a few echoes, but we have gone as a society. Well, we turned our back, not turned our back, but we became complacent, and here it is again, right?
Rabbi, can
I'm
I
not
jump
trying to.
in? Can I jump in and quote the newest, hottest Israeli comedian? He says, "They told us never again, but now we know. Maybe it was never ever again. Never
Never, ever,
ever
never, never. By the way,
ever again."
he's coming. He's
I
coming
saw
to
that.
Silver Spring. If anybody wants to,
Yeah, I
he's very
Oh
know.
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's so amazing.
Yes, yes. Nechami and I are hopefully planning to go to do it's something that we never do. We never ever ever did anything like this. We've never been to a concert, but I feel like first of all, a person like that who's just so joyfully fighting the battle on the front
He's
lines.
so amazing. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Yochai Sponder. If anybody wants to know who
That's
this
so
is,
funny because the other day Rabbi Marcus here in Mission Viejo quoted him, and I was like, "Yes, Yoga."
he's just because he's the way we should address it with a humor and with a sense of positivity
Yes,
and yes. So ultimately, yes. So, but the point is not to say that God is saying your enemies are always going to be there and always be breathing on them. Just understand that you're on the clock, always. You're always on the clock. There's always work to be done. There's going to be the Yetzer Hara. That's going to reason we read the Az Yashir every single year is to understand, and we read about the Exodus, and we read about Egypt, and we read because there is an Egypt, and there is a battle, and there are exoduses, and then there has to be the idea of trying to bury Egypt, the Egypt within you, really truly bury it. Not just the enemy on the outside. That's too easy. Too many people like fighting the enemy on the outside because it's easier to fight the enemy on the outside than to fight the enemy on the inside. So like a lot of these people, I don't mean to disparage anybody. Oh, they're all right, vigilant anti-Semites. They'll call out every anti-Semite. They're the Facebook warriors, right? Kol hakavod. In your own life, what have you done for Yiddishkeit? Your own life. And as I said often, stop being an anti-Semite. Be a pro-Semite. Be pro your own Judaism.
that's a good
Be
point.
do you, and that's Az Yasha is not just simply saying always be vigilant because enemies are always around you. And they're going to keep on chasing you through the desert and through all of this. No, what we're saying is Az Yasha, you have Hashem always at your side. Az Zekeli Van Veil. You're going to win, but it's going to take a journey through the desert. And you're going with faith and bitachon and shvitz, etc. So ultimately, we will. The promise is that's going to happen. This Az Yashir that showed it to us once, his book ended with the song that Az Yashir, God says, you will sing this again. Don't worry, you will sing this again. But until we do, there is an enemy out there, or an enemy in there, right? And we have to do our best to stay on top of this enemy. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi.
We
Wow,
look
it's such
forward
a
to seeing
pleasure
as
to be
many of
back.
you as possible. Yeah, Jerry, it's great to have you. And Carrie, it's great to see you. Remind everybody this Friday night, tomorrow night at 5 o'clock sharp. We got to start sharp because candle lighting is very soon thereafter. We want to show a little special video presentation. Our little precious Ita is going to
Her third
conquer
birthday.
all of us with her cuteness.
Oh,
Not hard.
oh
Yeah.
God.
Yes.
What a
And
sweetie.
she really is. She really is. We'll put it later on YouTube, her little video that she made. But we want everybody to participate. If you can, join us for that Friday night. Light Shabbos candles with her. We'll then have a lively Friday night, a davening in the spirit of Shabbat Shira, and then we'll have a meal for everybody to participate in. All right, everybody?
Thank you,
Okay.
Thank you so
Rabbi.
much, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom
Thank you.
lechulam.
Nice to see you again. Thank you. Bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Good to see
Shabbat
you. Good
shalom.
to see you, Carrie. All
Thank
the
you.
best.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye.
Bye.